There we are. Hello, everyone. Again, thanks for joining us at this 9th edition of the Energy Efficiency Academy. And the aim of the Academy is assisting all the stakeholders in comprehending and applying the new Energy Efficiency Directive in Europe. And the Academy is a collaborative effort of the Odyssey Muur project, the European Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, EEECP, and the International Copper Association Europe. Today's session is a bit of a special episode for many reasons. First of all, this webinar has a special support from the European Commission as it is listed as an event under the Energy Days of the EU Sustainable Energy Week that will take place next week. And I'm sure that we will meet many of you next week in Brussels. But second, we will follow a different format for this episode than we are used to in the Energy Efficiency Academy. We will have two parts. The first part will be, as usual, a few presentations, followed by Q&A with you, the audience. And after that, we will extend the session with a second part, which is a panel discussion. And for that panel discussion, I will hand over the moderation to Jean-Sébastien Broc from IEECP, who will by then be joined by Stefan Bouzarovski, professor at the University of Manchester, and Marta García París, co-director of the Ecoserveis Association. So it's a busy schedule for today, so let's kick off with the first presentation. Please join me in welcoming Veronika Jiříčková from DG Energy. And Veronika, she will enlighten us on the new provisions on energy poverty in the recast directive, energy efficiency.
Thank you very much, Diedert. Good morning, everyone. Just wait for the slides to be put on the screen, and then we can start.
There we go.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So, hello, everyone. My name is Veronika Jiříčková. I'm a policy officer, and I work in DG ENER at the Energy Efficiency Unit, where we are responsible for the Energy Efficiency Directive. So both for the implementation, but we also prepared and negotiated the revision of the Energy Efficiency Directive, which was part of the Fit for 55 legislative package proposed by the Commission in 2021. And after 2 years of negotiations, the revised directive was adopted and entered into force last year in October. And it includes provisions which relate to energy poverty and energy poverty alleviation. So the goal of my presentation would be to walk you through these provisions. So we can go to the next slide. So maybe the rationale, why do we talk about energy poverty in an energy efficiency directive, where the main goal is to set obligations for a more efficient transformation and generation and distribution of energy, and also set objectives for energy savings in end use. But we now also have these provisions aimed at alleviating energy poverty. And that's because energy efficiency was identified as one of the most effective solutions to alleviate energy poverty, and also to overcome some of the potential negative distributional impacts of pricing measures. So this is why the Energy Efficiency Directive was chosen to include these provisions. And the main ones are listed here. So for the first time, we now have an EU-wide definition of energy poverty. I'll get in more detail to that a bit later, but that's where you'll see why we talk about energy poverty alleviation in an energy efficiency directive. The definition will provide some more clarity on that. Then there's a novelty where the revised directive in Article 8, which is the article which sets the annual energy savings obligation in end use, we now have what we call a just transition sub-target. So this is a requirement where a share of these annual energy savings in end use will have to be achieved among vulnerable groups of the population. And then there are two articles which deal with requirements to prioritize, protect, and empower vulnerable customers and other vulnerable groups of the population. So I listed here the beneficiaries. The Energy Efficiency Directive talks about 4 categories of vulnerable populations. So it's people affected by energy poverty, vulnerable customers, people in low-income households, and people living in social housing. So this is just a first overview, and we'll get in more detail on all of these provisions in the next slides. So we can move to the next one, where you can see the energy poverty definition. Now, why is it important to have a definition? First of all, there is some, let's say, energy poverty is a distinct form of poverty, but we have seen also in the negotiations that it's quite hard to have it recognized as a distinct form of poverty. And this definition recognizes the multi-dimensional nature of energy poverty. So how do we define energy poverty in the EED? It's defined as a household's lack of access to essential energy services, so that's the main part. But this lack of access is due to a combination of factors. So this is key. It's the combination of the factors, and you can see the factors at the end of the definition. So it's non-affordability, insufficient disposable income, high expenditure on energy, and poor energy efficiency of homes. So that's why energy poverty is a distinct form of poverty, because it's not only insufficient disposable income, but it's the combination of a household with insufficient disposable income, of which a high proportion is spent on energy bills, because the household lives in a poor energy efficient home. So that's the definition, which obviously recognizes that there is a relevant national context in which we operate, and existing social policy and other relevant national policies have to be recognized. But the main part of this definition is the combination of these factors and the factors themselves. With that, we can move to the next slide, where I wanted to show a little bit more the beneficiaries. So as I said, we talk about 4 target groups, which should be the beneficiaries of energy efficiency improvement measures. So first, it's people affected by energy poverty. And maybe before I get into that, why is it important to know a bit more who these people are? It's because if you want to introduce some measures which target these beneficiaries, you need to know how to find them, how to identify them. So people affected by energy poverty, this relates to the definition of energy poverty. As I said, it refers to the relevant national context. So each member state may adopt its own legal definition of energy poor households, while, of course, incorporating the main factors which are listed in the EU-wide definition in the EED. Then we have vulnerable customers. So this is a concept which is already defined in EU law, in the Electricity Directive. Vulnerable customers, again, member states have some flexibility which criteria they choose to define vulnerable customers. It could be income levels, it could be the share of energy expenditure of the disposable income, it could be energy efficiency of home, but also critical dependence on electrical equipment for health reasons, for example. The novelty with the EED is that we are asking member states to take into account also final user when they define vulnerable customers. So there are 2 concepts that we talk about. It's the final customer and the final user. The difference being that the final user is somebody who doesn't have a direct contract with the energy supplier. So I'm sure that even today, some of you might be final users. For example, if you are renting your apartment and it's the landlord who has the energy contract, and you are only paying in your rent. So this means you would be a final user. The third category is people in low-income households. So there is no definition in EU law of people in low-income households, but generally we talk about people who earn 60% of the national median equalized disposable income after social transfers. So this is something that member states can use to define people in low-income households. And then people in social housing. Again, there is no definition in EU law, but generally we refer to social housing as residential rental accommodation, which is provided at submarket prices. All right, so these are the beneficiaries for the prioritization of energy efficiency improvement measures. And we can move to the next provision, which is Article 8. So this is the energy savings obligation in end use. The EED brings a novelty, which is a stepwise increase of the annual cumulative energy savings obligation in end use. So you will see that it will increase every 2 years. And the novelty is this just transition sub-target. So this means that member states will have to achieve a share of the total amount of energy savings among those 4 categories of target population. Now, it's for member states to define this share. There are, let's say, 2 options how to define the share which needs to be achieved in each member state among the vulnerable categories. Either member states have already identified in the first NECP the share of population which they deem is affected by energy poverty, using their own indicators, which they notified in the NECP. In that case, the share to be achieved would be equal to the share which was notified in the NECP. But if it's not the case, and we have seen that many member states have not notified the share of people affected by energy poverty in the first NECPs, there is an opportunity to notify the share in the upcoming NECPs. However, if the share has not been notified in any of the NECP, then member states are asked to establish the share by using 4 indicators. So we can move to the next slide, and you will see that these 4 indicators are first, the inability to keep home adequately warm, then arrears on utility bills, total population which is living in a dwelling with a leaking roof, damp walls, floors or foundation, or rot in window frames or floor, and then at risk of poverty rate. So we have these numbers for all member states for 2019. And as I said, if the member state does not notify the share of people living in energy poverty, then they will have to take the average, the arithmetic average of these 4 indicators and establish the share which will then have to be achieved among people, among the 4 vulnerable categories. So that's another novelty of the EED. And then we can move to the main article, which is a new article dedicated to empowering, protecting, and prioritizing vulnerable groups of the population. So the main and general provision here is that member states are required to implement energy efficiency measures as a priority among the vulnerable groups. Now, the article lists a number of measures which member states are encouraged to implement. Some of them are, for example, related to consumer protection and information measures, but others are implementing energy efficiency measures to mitigate distributional effects of other policies. Here, there's a clear link with the Social Climate Fund regulation. As you know, the EU ETS was extended to transport and buildings, and this will have repercussions, negative repercussions, especially for the vulnerable groups of the population. And so here, for example, member states are asked to make best use of public funding, both at national and EU level, so including the social, the resources available from the Social Climate Fund, among targeting the vulnerable groups of the population. Other things, other measures listed in Article 24 are for member states to make sure that the vulnerable groups of the population have access to technical assistance and access to funding, and that they are generally prioritized when member states design measures, energy efficiency measures. There's also a requirement for member states to establish networks of experts, which would develop strategies and advise local and national policymakers when it comes to, for example, the definition of energy poverty and which indicators at national level are relevant. They should also advise member states and local policymakers when it comes to the energy efficiency improvement measures which alleviate energy poverty. Now, if there is already a relevant network of experts which is existing in a member state, member states don't have to create a new one, but they can simply entrust this network of experts with these new tasks. So that's Article 24, which is really the core provisions for alleviation of energy poverty. And I also wanted to mention in my last slide the Article 22. So this is a revised article which already existed in the previous EED, and it aims at information and awareness raising to promote behavioral change and energy savings. And the recast brings a novelty in that each member state will have to establish a one-stop shop or a similar mechanism where especially final customers, final users, households, SMEs can get information and assistance, technical, administrative, financial advice when it comes to energy efficiency measures. And why do I mention it here? Because there is a clear requirement for member states to make sure that these one-stop shops will also provide dedicated services to households which are affected by energy poverty, because we know that these are often the hard-to-reach segments of the population. And yes, this is a complementary provision to all of those that I mentioned before, and it aims especially at empowering. The recast really wants to make sure that the vulnerable groups of the population become active players when it comes to energy efficiency. All right, so that concludes the overview of the main provisions in the recast EED. And I'll be staying here for any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Veronika. And indeed, I see that some questions have meanwhile come in, but let's keep them for after the third presentation. So let's immediately jump to the second one, which is coming up on the screen. So Samuele Livraghi from the IEECP will present us an overview of member states' energy efficiency measures that are either specifically focused on tackling energy poverty or that include provisions related to energy poverty or low-income households. So Samuele, looking forward
Exactly.
to this.
Thank you so much, Didier. Again, my name is Samuele Livraghi. I've developed this presentation in collaboration with Jean-Sébastien Broc. We work at ICP. Today we'll be discussing target groups and measures identified for energy poverty alleviation. And in light of this, I would also like to take the moment to thank Veronika for the extremely clear and comprehensive presentation on what the recast EED says about energy poverty. So today we'll be diving into the measure reported under energy poverty, both in ODISE-MIOR and in ReportNet. We see how we are reporting in ODISE-MIOR for energy poverty. We'll dive into some best practice examples of measures that we've identified as very comprehensive in the way that they approach energy poverty. And then we'll also dive in the target groups of energy poverty alleviation. So just to clarify a moment, in MIOR, measures are reported under energy poverty, but MIOR is a database that normally includes policies and measures in the countries covered as well as for the European Union as a whole, which aim at the improvement of energy efficiency in the end-use sectors for households, industry, transport, and services. Indeed, measures that do not deal with energy efficiency normally are not reported in MIOR. In the case of energy poverty, these entail aids for energy bills, such as social tariffs or energy vouchers, or measures to protect from disconnection. So under energy poverty in MIOR, we see 107 measures reported. You'll see in the coming weeks that a lot of new measures are being added. So far, 14 of these are completed measures that have run their course. 84 are still ongoing. And then there are 8 advanced and 8 proposed in the medium long term. But what is most important for us to address here is that 24 are categorized as aiming mainly or exclusively at alleviating energy poverty, while 83 are categorized as including an important component addressing energy poverty, and then we'll see what the difference between these two categorization is. While when we look at measures reported under energy poverty on ReportNet, because of the NECPR, the National Energy and Climate Progress Reports, we see that there are a lot of measures that are reported per member states according to the original Article 7 of the EED that mention the member states' obligation. And in this instance, we see that over 20 member states mentioned that at least one of their policy measures or group of measures is contributing actively to energy poverty alleviation, with a total of 42 policy measures or group of measures. But in this landscape, only 12 member states reported an amount of energy savings related to energy poverty alleviation. To give you more of a context on what this means, that means that, yes, we see more than half of member states actually tackling the problem of energy poverty, but we also see that less than half, 44% of the member states have reported energy poverty savings, where a clear change will be needed because of the Article 8.3 new definition. And also when we talk about energy savings, so far most of the energy savings that we see reported for energy poverty in priority groups, they come 95% from French schemes. That doesn't mean that energy savings are not also achieved through other measures. These are just currently not fully reported also under energy savings for energy poverty. And while Veronika already mentioned and described how energy poverty is defined, one thing that I like to point out here is that this definition needs to be considered anytime we want to address energy poverty, especially because when we get to the MUIR database, we'll see that when you open the interface, you have the options to both select for ongoing and complete or completed measures, and in the case of energy poverty, to directly observe which measures have been reported for. And you can, partners have been able to report measures in different ways. So measures that aim mainly or exclusively at energy poverty. This means that these measures are designed and they are targeted to directly address energy poverty by alleviating the conditions that Veronika was already mentioning before and causes of energy poverty in these affected households. The most important point that I feel like it should be stressed here is that when a measure is aimly or exclusively intended to alleviate energy poverty, that means that most of the budget of the measure will be directly linked to alleviation of energy poverty. And that's why it is important to focus on the eligibility criteria that will allow people to get access to these measures. So identify the priority groups so that they will be able to access measures such as dedicated energy assistance programs, subsidies for energy efficient appliances for low-income households or vulnerable groups, and so on. The other way that you will be able to find energy poverty measures reported in MUIR is when they include an important component addressing energy poverty. So that means that the measure ideally should be tackling energy efficiency, and it incorporates some provision, parts of it that will address energy poverty. In doing so, we have noticed a lot of measures, for example, where higher grant rates are made available for low-income households in general renovation programs, or they're promoting energy efficiency in social housing, or they're also promoting free energy advice service for vulnerable households, whereas normally this kind of energy advice is provided with a fee for other households not in energy poverty or that are not identified as low income. Thanks to the overview of the measures in MUR, we've also been able to identify the priority groups that are generally described. And these are normally low-income households, people with disability, people that get access to social benefits, families with children, and pregnant people. Normally, it is very easy to comply with reporting for such criteria for national bodies that do take care of dispersing these subsidies, because these categories have been already identified, but that doesn't mean that we should stop here. We know that energy poverty is a comprehensive phenomenon that should be addressed accordingly. And in doing so, I would like to bring two examples to the discussion. The first one would be the Warmer Home Scheme, which is made available in Ireland. They provide free home energy upgrades to homeowners who get certain social welfare payments to improve the energy efficiency and warmth of their house. Not only they have an extremely comprehensive eligibility criteria list based on social welfare payments. So if you have right to the fuel allowance, disability allowance, or a lot of other types of allowances that the Irish government does offer, but if also your building has a building energy rating of C or lower, then you are eligible for this scheme that will indeed improve and renovate your house. Another scheme that I wanted to bring our attention to, it's a Luxembourgish example, the individual housing assistance schemes. This is an extremely comprehensive policy package, and what I'm focusing here is just some points of this policy package. Because not only they put out an extremely comprehensive set of measures to tackle energy efficiency, adaptation to climate change, and inclusivity of minority groups in this policy package, but also several policies existing in this package are directly thought out to alleviate energy poverty, such as the improvement bonus for the upgrading, transformation, renovation, and sanitation and creation of housing, and the interest grant for the climate loan, which is also for renovation, and an interest grant for housing improvements for specific conditions. And most of these subsidies or interest grants are given out based on income differentiation. This was the end of my presentation, and I guess that if you'll have more questions or you're curious about what MUR does, the first link is the one that you can go to if you want to see more. And if you want to contact me or Jean-Sébastien, please, these are our emails, and there are also 2 more webinars coming up, but Diedert will say more about that. And thank you.
Hey, thanks a lot, Samuele, for this very nice overview again, and for keeping perfectly in time. So we can immediately go over to our third speaker, Solenne Toum from ATEE, and she will complement the overview given by Samuele by illustrating how such measures are designed and implemented, comparing the French white certificate scheme and Wallonia's package to tackle energy poverty. So Solenne, the floor is yours. Thanks.
Thank you, Diedert. I'll show my presentation right away. So, hello everyone, I'm Solenne Toum from ATEE. ATEE is a non-profit association of stakeholders in French, and we work with the ministry as one of the main stakeholders who implement the Article 8 in France, mostly by energy saving action, but also accompanying programs. Today, I'm here part of the ENSMOV Plus consortium, which is a European program that aims to support the implementation of Article 8 of the EED within the 7 member states of EU. And we work with public authorities, national association of stakeholders, but also research labs such as EEECP. all the information shared today will be available on the ENSMOV Plus platform, and you can also find resources about other topics such as measure and verification, energy saving potentials, and of course, energy poverty policies. And today I'm here to give some example about the energy saving policies that are listed in the ENSMOV Plus project, and you can find all the detailed example on the platform. At the moment, there is 7 examples available, and I'm going to talk mostly about France, which is the one I am the most knowledgeable about, and also giving you a cross analysis with the Belgium, more especially the Wallonia's policy package on dwelling renovation. So first of all, a little table to give you an overview of the policies, which are very different. In France, we have a centralized system. That means that the energy saving policies for tackling energy poverty are part of the bigger scheme, which is the French White Certificate Scheme. And in Wallonia, it's more like a decentralized system, which within the measures are provided to provide specific support to specific type of priority groups. And there's mostly a grant scheme for energy renovation of dwellings. In France, there is standardization, which are deemed saving based on action made, such as isolation or putting in place heat pumps, for example. But there's also accompanying program which target not direct saving, but accompanying people such as trainings, simplification of the scheme, or all the administrative issues which are really a hassle in France. So first of all, an overview of the policy package in Wallonia. There's many policies that aim to alleviate energy poverty, such as housing grant, Renopac, and also grant for small works. There's two main policies, which is MUBAR2 and TAP, which are especially focused on energy poverty. And I believe the housing grant is more for everyone, every owner, but some of it is related to energy poverty, of course. In French, we have what we call the Energy Poverty White Certificate, which is a sub-target in the French White Certificates scheme. And this sub-target represents up to 60% of all the obligation for the current period. Indeed, obligated parties in France are obliged to fulfill an amount of white certificate which are issued for renovation work on building owned or rented by modest or in situation of energy poverty as household. So it was implemented in 2016, and this is a specific type of white certificate, which can be called Energy Poverty White Certificate, which is very different for the classic one. Few figures about the energy saving obligation in France. So we count in kilowatt-hour CUMAC, which are the saving which are accumulated and actualized on the lifetime of the action, because all the certificates are are delivered beforehand. So before the end of the lifetime of the installation, for example. So as you can see, for the period 2022 to 2025, the classic target, the energy poverty target is almost 60% of the classic target, as the total target is up to 3,000 terawatt-hour. So I give you a lot of information about the French scheme, about a lot of figures, but I make a quick reminder of how to produce weight certificate in France. So the first way to produce weight certificate in France is to make standardized action, which are the installation of high performance equipment, and all the standardized action are deemed saving, which are defined by ministerial order. At the moment, there is 228 standardization. My slide is not up to date. And I skipped the specific action, but I go through the weight certificate program. So as I said, there's accompanying programs here to give information, training, innovation, and also to tackle energy poverty. So, and in France, mostly the energy saving for energy poverty is made by standardized action. Following in my presentation, I will explain to you how we define household eligible to energy poverty weight certificate in France. And I will also make the parallel in Wallonia on how vulnerable target energy poverty people are defined in Wallonia also. In France, it's mostly based on the household income and the number of persons in the household, but also where the household lives. Indeed, living in Paris is much costlier than living in the country in France, so it is taken into account. And there is threshold of income that are published by the French ministry each year. And there is also published by the French ministry ratios of people in needs by localities. So to give a little example, for a household living in the Paris region, a 4-member household living in Paris region with a yearly income of 48K euro, this household will be eligible to energy poverty weight certificate. For the Belgium case, each priority group is defined by the policies. So each policies have different criteria to define the eligible people. There is also criteria on the income, but in difference of France, there is also criteria based on the social situation of the household, which is a household with a single parents or people with disabilities or anything like that, which do not exist in France, I think. So I give you also some figures and results about the energy poverty weight certificates. So up to this date, there is 400 terawatt-hour since the beginning of the period, and the action mostly done is installation, heat pump, and also deep renovation of individual houses. And to give you a half estimation on what is done for 1 TWh produced, it means that 5 billions, sorry, it's M, but I believe it's billions euros is invested in energy renovation toward households in situations of energy poverty. That means that this money is directly given to the beneficiary of the scheme. Just a slide to say that energy poverty rate certificates are mostly issued from standardized action. And a little also talk about accompanying program in France. 2 examples, the SLIME program, which aim massively to improve the identification of households in energy poverty, and the Toi d'abord program, which aim to support the the production and the building of very social housing, which are managed by association. Also some figures about the Wallonian system. So as I said, the 2 measures, MIBAR 2 and PAP, are 100% reported as alleviating energy poverty within the Energy Efficiency Directive. And there is also the Wallon long-term building renovation strategy, which is a grant scheme for all households, but 1/3 is reported as alleviating energy poverty. So main conclusion about my presentation about all the policies which exist to tackle energy efficiency, to tackle energy poverty in Europe. There is 2 main types of policies which are complementary. There is large schemes such as in France, also Ireland and Greece, where the energy poverty target is a sub-target of a larger policies. In France, the energy poverty is a sub-target of the energy efficiency obligation scheme, which is for all energy efficiency. And there's also specific scheme in other countries such as Belgium, where there's several smaller policies and specific issues. So it's the end of my presentation. I think you can go on the platform, read the example, and it will be maybe clearer.
Okay, thanks a lot, Solenne, for this comprehensive overview and good illustration of what it could indeed mean. Meanwhile, I see that your colleague speakers have been very active in the Q&A, so many of the questions raised by the audience have already been answered. I see still some questions coming in, and Solenne, before you jump out, I see you disappearing. Let me start with this last question by Junior Bangala. More like a comment than a question, I think, but Junior is from Belgium and for Wallonia, and I feel like all policies, he says, that we've had to make the ecological transition were not benefiting low-income households. So do you think we can tackle energy poverty while doing the transition to green energy?
Yeah, more than a question, because I don't have the answer of that.
Okay.
I think that I think it's more profitable to have tailored to have specific schemes which are tailored to support the more in need, whereas in France it's not the last decile of the lower household income which are benefiting of the policies, but not much more the middle class, I think.
But Samuele, I see that you raised your hand, so you have.
Yeah, no, I also wanted to add something on here because I've also studied the case alongside with Solenne, and I think that what is important to mention here is what I was mentioning about including like rolling out subsidies on an income base, but also to reserve a specific part of the budget for low-income households so that it's not on a first-come, first-served basis, because otherwise, you know, if you're in a situation of social exclusion or general disadvantage, it might be harder for you to get access to these subsidies that are indeed available. Maybe they're not enough, maybe they're not comprehensive, maybe they're not addressing the regressive effect of the current policies enough, but there are these kind of subsidies rolled out. So it's also important to save a part of the budget for our priority groups and make sure that also we are more lenient, like legislators are more lenient towards people that do not get the same access to these services. Of course, just transition is an extremely complicated topic. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks a lot. Just see, because there were a lot of interesting questions already answered, but I think, Jean-Sébastien, in the upcoming discussion, you can also refer back to them because the responses have been quite extensive. I suggest that we start the panel discussion now. So I see that meanwhile, Stefan Bouzarovski has joined us. So Stefan, if you could also come back on scene.
Diedert, maybe just before we start the panel discussion, I would have one more question to Veronika. Thanks first for Veronika for answering already some of the question in the Q&A panel. So I encourage the participants to look at these answers. You presented very well the new context brought by the EED, but we know that recently a new EPBD, Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, was published, also with some provisions on worst performing buildings and energy poverty. There is also the social climate plans upcoming next year. So I don't know if you would like to say a word about how do you see all these pieces of legislation going together to make a stronger case for, especially for using energy efficiency as a way to tackle energy poverty.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry, thanks a lot for these questions. Of course, I mean the EED is the piece of legislation which focuses on energy efficiency as such. But we know, I mean, it also comes from the definition of energy poverty that one of the criteria, one of the indicators, is the inefficiency of the building where the vulnerable groups of the population often live. So the EPBD, the Energy Performance Buildings Directive, will be a crucial file as well to help lift people from energy poverty, because we know that buildings, we need to start with the buildings very often to tackle energy poverty. And on the social climate fund, well, member states are now drafting social climate plans. I think my colleague who's responsible for social climate fund normally should be joining this webinar. But anyway, these will be important because they can be considered in the same way as the NECPs as a sort of plans where member states will propose measures. As I said, first there will be the temporary direct income support, but the most important part will be the structural measures and investments in energy efficiency. So that's what we would like to see in the social climate plans, you know, in relation to the extension of the EU ETS to buildings and transport. Of course, temporary direct income support will be important, but the more structural measures as part of the social climate plans will be crucial. So yeah, these three pieces should be seen together to really bring about the change.
Thanks a lot, Veronika. I think that's very clear that there was a lot of effort by the Commission and the co-legislator to make all the pieces consistent and going into the same directions of of course, the carbon neutrality by 2050, but also just transition and leaving no one behind. As mentioned by Diedert, we move now to the panel discussion. Please continue asking questions in the Q&A panel. We will start with a few questions from my side. That's the privilege of moderating the panel discussion. But of course, then we will go to your questions. And I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage Marta García París, co-director of the Ecoserveis Association in Spain, and Stefan Bouzarovski, professor at the University of Manchester in the UK. Also because, yes, even if the UK is no more in the EU, we have a lot of lessons to learn from their side. And Stefan has been involved previously in the European Energy Poverty Observatory as well. So yes, a lot of knowledge to share with us. So we got the broader picture from Veronika, Samuele, and Solenne, and now we will discuss a bit more some specific cases. Veronika already mentioned the case of tenants who can be with more difficulties compared to homeowners, for example. And that was addressed in the ENPO project where Stefan was involved. And there are also other specific cases like the rural areas where there might be also other specific factors. And that's why we have Marta today with partner in the Renoverti project. So when you assess the energy poverty in these specific sectors, so it could be the private rented sector for ENPO or the rural energy poverty for Renoverti, do you find the usual criteria that were presented by Veronika, but also by Samuele and Solenne? So based on income, looking at the energy performance of the dwellings, you think they are also relevant for this type of cases, or is there a need for complementary criteria? I don't know, maybe Stefan, you want to go first on that?
I'm happy to go first, and yeah, thank you for the invitation to participate today, and for everyone who is attending. I continue to be involved in research and policy on the EU at the EU level despite Brexit, so I'm very happy to be part of these discussions. So the one thing I'd say, and based on ENPO, but also other projects, like for example the Energy Demand Research Centre that we're currently running in the UK as well. The one thing I would say is that the new developments such as the PBD and all of these really integrations of vulnerable groups, and also the considerations around just transitions at the EU level are very important. But there is a tendency, and I don't wish to, obviously it's great to have this, but you know, if we were to move one step further, a lot of the work right now is what I would call object focused. So we are looking at buildings. So it's all about improving buildings, which is okay because we do need to improve the efficiency of the building stock. And it's based on a relatively abstract conception of income. Again, that's great. It does not necessarily work for situations such as people in the rented sector, whether private or public, particularly private, so and social rented. Why does it not work? And I've seen this in everyday experience, and it's come through the EU, through Horizon projects and through ENPO and so on. It's because the first of all, groups that are in the private rented sector are more difficult to pick up through a lot of these indicators. Secondly, they may not necessarily feel like they're empowered to participate in the transition. They are structurally disempowered because of the relations with the tenants and landlords. They feel like it's the landlord's job to do this. And thirdly, the issue is that they may not necessarily confer the benefits themselves because the benefits go to the building and not the tenants. So we have to find ways of addressing, I think, particularly these situations. And I can give you examples, particularly where we have what we call hidden renting, which is happening quite a lot. across the EU, where people actually are not officially on the rented on the books, but they are living in the rented sector, where we have also found that renters cannot do anything about the dwelling because it's all in the power of the landlord, and sometimes the landlords are themselves well, there could be large corporate landlords who don't care about this, or the rent could be bundled into the housing costs, so it's not picked up by the indicators, and so on. So we have a range of situations that are more complex, and that's why I think we need to start moving towards more what I would call people-focused energy poverty policies and experience-focused, so policies based on the lived experience of energy poverty. So it's all great to have these indicators, and I've done a lot of work around indicators, especially with relative indicators around expenditure and income and so on, but they only pick up so much. We need to have better panels to pick up the lived experience, and we need to also have, and this is, I cannot underscore this enough, a neighborhood local presence of renovation programs, so that there's a sort of intermediation between landlords and tenants in many cases to support tenants where they want to improve the energy efficiency of the dwelling, to find customized solutions at the local level. So working with local authorities, working with the third sector on an individualized basis. Because I think what we're going to end up with, and this is not uncommon and unexpected, is that it's kind of the low-hanging fruit will be picked up by a lot of these policies. So it's going to be the groups that are easily detectable and the housing that is easily upgradable that will actually receive the subsidy or will be picked up through the indicators. But in fact, the groups that are the most vulnerable, the most underserved, I don't want to use the term hard to reach, because it's not about them, it's about us. So, in fact, it's the structural elements of the system which result in some groups being deprived, being unable to access these services or unable to be picked up by policy, that will be the result of all of this in the end. So to really address vulnerability, we have to have a people-focused energy transition, people-focused energy efficiency policies. So I think that's really the next step. Now that we are ambitiously looking at these targets, we have to think what a people and a sort of lived experienced focused energy poverty policy looks like, an energy efficiency policy as well. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Stefan. And you already contributed to one of the discussion. We'll probably come back to that later about whether the scheme should be more specific or try to be as broad as possible. So I think we got your position on that already. Marta, so do you want to complement this about the case of rural energy poverty?
Hi, thanks for the invitation. Yeah, I mean, I take one of the premises that Veronika mentioned at the beginning. Energy efficiency is the most effective solution to alleviate energy poverty, and it acts as counterweight for prices. And it is true that we cannot fix energy poverty without fixing housing. And as Stefan mentioned, with the private rented sector, there are also specificities in the rural areas. There is a recognized inequality between urban and rural in Europe, and a lot has been done, but a lot more has to be done. And this is why we are participating in projects as Renoverty, what IEECP coordinates. It's a live INEA co-funded project, and the idea of the project is to deliver tools and resources to support local actors to build and implement financially viable renovation roadmaps. So we want to tackle energy poverty by promoting renovation, specifically in vulnerable households in rural areas, because they are like, they have a double vulnerability range. I mean, you ask Jean-Sébastien about the determinants or the differences, the specificities in rural areas. And within this research that we have carried within Renoverty, led by partners like Tesla, IEECP, and REGEA mainly, I mean, we have analyzed the 70 relevant scientific policy literature, and we have come to a conclusion that there are determinants that makes that rural areas, I mean, face more a situation of more social exclusion, and why? Because there, I mean, we have classified like the determinants of rural poverty in 4 areas. There are specific demographic structures in rural areas. For example, there are older population, so fewer population on a working age, and that makes the territory or these areas more vulnerable. There is also we have also identified like limited educational capabilities in terms of data. For example, around 40% of population in cities have completed tertiary education, while in rural areas, in general, in Europe, as an average, it's around 18%. So it's quite a lower access to or availability of education in this case. Also limited level capabilities. I mean, Eurostat mentioned like in general, there are lower incomes in rural areas and lack of infrastructures and services. I mean, inadequate transport infrastructure, difficulty in accessing jobs. So this makes like the determinants in general for rural poverty, but the main drivers for rural poverty contribute to an increased exposure or a higher exposure of rural population to energy poverty. And yeah, there has also been identified different characteristics that contribute to this higher energy poverty rate in rural areas. For example, high rates of vulnerable population, as mentioned before. In Spain, for example, the poverty rate, I mean, I'm come from Spain, this is why I mentioned this example, but the poverty rate in urban areas is 29%, and in rural areas is higher, is 36%, and it's quite a trend in Europe. Also, the inefficient housing stock, it is common in Europe, no? I mean, the quality of dwellings, I mean, most of the dwellings were built before the first thermal regulations. So yeah, it is quite a common issue here, the inefficient housing stock, the limited choices of energy careers, I mean, the limitations and the grid access, and the rely on fossil fuels in rural areas more than in urban areas. And also interesting to comment that the consumer behavior, the use of energy in rural and urban follows a different pattern. And for example, in Bulgaria, to take an example, the average is that in rural areas, the expenditure for electricity and gas, it's around 14%, while in urban areas, for example, is 7%. So it's quite different here, the pattern. So it's interesting to tackle it different, or to think on a specificities, as you mentioned. And also in Spain, the consumption, the energy consumption in the residential sector in urban and rural differs also. So yeah, all this makes this framework of the need of specificities beyond the categories or the priority groups that the directive mentioned.
Thanks a lot, Marta. I see in the meantime that we get quite some questions coming in. So I will control myself and ask just one more question to you before we open the discussion to the questions from the audience. So that my second question is more about whether you identified good example, good practices, especially in terms of policies. And maybe, Stefan, coming back to what you mentioned people-focused policies or experience-focused policy. Would you have examples to illustrate that?
I mean, there are a few, but for me, I think Barcelona is a good case. Sorry to use a case from Spain and Catalonia, Marta, but I think it's one of the cities where these things are probably the best coordinated at the local level. We have seen some good examples in Netherlands and Germany. We have seen also examples where non-governmental organizations work well with authorities. So there are cases. But for me, Barcelona, why I always use it is because there is a really good alignment between the local government, the non-governmental sector, the state, and the groups particularly representing vulnerable people. So they have multiple avenues for recourse, to work with also utilities sometimes to force them to work in particular ways. So what that case always shows to me is that you have to have all of these, it's good to have, you can have all kinds of national policies, and we've looked at and analyzed the NECPs in detail, and they've been improved over the years, and it's good to have, but however good your NECP is, you have to work locally to align these things. And I think the other nice case, and I've seen that across Europe, is where there is licensing schemes, particularly for landlords, which are also supportive of vulnerable groups. So in fact, the licensing scheme isn't just there to license the landlords, but it's also a mechanism for collaboration at the local level. So I would refer you to the ENPO website. There is a deliverable there where we looked at over, I think, 100 policies, and we ranked the policies, and then you can see, so we rank them according to the procedural and the distributional dimension. And the challenge always is not necessarily the money and the funding, but the procedural element. In other words, getting everyone involved. But you can see which policies were ranked where. So, and I'm happy to get back to that if you want to. But there are examples of that. Yeah.
Thanks, Stefan. I think it's also important to mention that yes, financing and funding is important, but that's not the only point to make your policy or your scheme successful. And that, yeah, as you said, engaging is probably the first. Engaging the everyone, every stakeholders, including of course the households, is the main point. Marta, on your side, well, I hope Stefan did not steal your favorite example, but do you have other examples that you would like to share?
Yeah, I mean, focus on rural energy poverty. I mean, and I'm mentioning this rural-urban inequality, or this rural energy efficiency gap, what is known in literature review. I mean, this situation which there is a seemingly slower uptake of energy efficiency improvement in rural areas. There have been different initiatives at different levels. For example, at European level, they just published the new EPBD, mentions specificities for rural areas. For example, invite member states to encourage financial institutions to promote financial products for renovation on rural areas. And also this, in the EPBD, there is a service promoted, the one-stop shop that you've been mentioning in the previous presentation. And there is a specific point that makes the need to implement one-stop shops in rural areas where you cannot access in 90 minutes in local transport. So at European level, they are like promoting measures to tackle this vulnerability in rural areas. Also at national level, and again, with the example of in Spain, for example, the Ministry of Ecological Transition, it's called Ministry of Ecological Transition and Demographic Challenge, because, I mean, this demographic challenge, this rurality specificity is very, very important. And thanks to this importance, the government, the national government, has implemented specific plans and programs to support energy poverty, energy renovation, and energy renovation in rural areas, specifically for vulnerable. And for example, I mean, there are different sub-programs. I'm not going to I can provide the details by link, but the DOS 5,000 for energy renewable installations, the PRE 5,000, which is targeting the renovation, and this this program has specificities, social criteria, so targeting not only rural but also vulnerable. This is the good thing at national level, because the measure is on it, but the challenge here is that only 1% of the funds have been requested by the rural. So we have an issue here, a challenge more than the financial availability, that it is true. I think there are other things, no, that as you mentioned, Jean-Sébastien, all the awareness, all the, we need to improve how we communicate or we transmit the information so all vulnerable consumers receive, digest, and can access all the information. And at local level also, there are some examples in Barcelona for the renovation. There are also examples where the municipality covers up to 100% of the renovation cost, plus the disturbance costs also of this renovation to vulnerable consumers. Also in some other municipalities, the local government has promoted innovative financial mechanisms, for example, try to a whole neighborhood and propose, like, if you cannot pay the renovation, if you are the owner of the household, you can just note as debt in the property registry the cost, so you cannot cover like upfront, and maybe if you sell one day the household, you will pay. I mean, the new buyer will solve that debt. So yeah, there's quite some examples at different levels, just to have some discussion here.
Thanks, Marta. And in what you said, you mentioned that it's not the thing is not only to have the specific programs or the specific provisions, but that sometimes they are there, but they are not used so much. And that goes to one of the questions we got from the audience, and I thank all the participants for all their questions. I'm not sure we will manage to handle all of them, but there is one that I like particularly and that I will use because it's also a way to ask to all speakers and panelists. That's the one from Borbalatos, and that's about whether it is better to do large scheme or specific scheme. And maybe I will, based on what Stefan and Marta already said, I will complement the question and to ask you how you see the roles, the complementarity, or whether there should be a priority between them, between large schemes that might be maybe more to mitigate distributional effects, and specific schemes, as Stefan mentioned earlier. I think he advocated for that already. That we need to take into account all the specific groups, and especially the ones that are out of the radars. I don't know, maybe Veronika, you want to start on that?
Sorry, oh, excuse me, but my connection froze for a while, so
No
I haven't.
So the question is, how do you see either the competition complementarity or the priority that should be set between large schemes that try to help as many households as possible and specific schemes that will target more every different groups, as explained by Stefan earlier as well?
Well, I would say that targeted measures are always better because maybe we touched upon it when it comes to these four groups, that sometimes they overlap and it's not always easy to see, you know, maybe one person belongs to the category of vulnerable customer, but also as a person affected by energy poverty. But I think that, yeah, I would say that the better approach would be to go for targeted measures so that we can really reach as many relevant people as possible so that they don't get lost. But I would be interested to hear from the other speakers.
Okay, so I will follow the agenda we had today. So maybe next, Samuele, if you want to comment on this.
Yeah. I personally think that, yeah, given the multidimensionality of the problem, both approaches are valid and should be implemented cohesively at the same time, because yes, targeted measure will address problems that are relevant for a very specific category of people, but there are much more like widespread issues, such as the quality of the housing itself, that just needs to happen both for environmental reason and for social justice reason, I would say. So yeah, I would say both of them should happen. The example that I was bringing of Luxembourg, I think, clarifies this a lot. So just general provision, so to make sure that everyone in the population can get to the same level of quality of life, but also specific provision that actually give time and space and money to special categories so that they can also get access to these funds and opportunities.
Thanks a lot, Samuele. Maybe we come back to France because Solène, you presented the example of the French white certificate scheme, and as mentioned by Samuele, if we look at the results reported by member states in their NECPR last year about the savings in 2021, 95% of the savings that were related to alleviating energy poverty comes to from the French scheme. I mean, 95% of all the savings in Europe. Well, there are different reasons for that, and it does not mean that it will be the same in the future. That was voluntary for the moment. Obviously, that's easier for France to report separately these savings because there are two, as you explained, there are two types of certificates in the French scheme. But based on your example, what would be the benefits of having this massive approach, let's say, of standardized actions?
Yeah, I was very surprised by the 95%. In my point of view, the fact that we have a more centralized system allow us more flexibility, which is the case with the standardized action. Every industrial can go to the ministry and provide some kind of energy saving equipment, which can be massified in the French renovation park, which can be very effective. I'll talk about standardization, but I think most of the energy savings are also made by accompanying programs. Within the bigger scheme, I think that accompanying program can be considered much like the small policies that specifically target one group of people. So, in my opinion, the bigger scheme enable us to make both.
Yes, and thanks to the different modalities. Okay, thanks, Solène, for sharing this. Stefan, do you want to add something about? Well, you made a strong case for specific schemes already in your first intervention. I don't know if you want to
I mean, yeah, I think it's a bit of a false dichotomy to say it's one or the other. So you need both, really. And I know I'm not quite sure what exactly we mean by specific or general scheme. I very much support the idea that you need schemes that are targeted, but also sensitive to the requirements and also the specific circumstances experienced by particular groups. So that has to be in the schemes. But you also need broad schemes that everyone can access, that pick up everyone that don't have very strict exclusion criteria, because energy poverty, energy vulnerability does not extend, is not simply about income, it's not simply about energy efficiency, it's not simply about practice, it's a lot of things together, so multidimensional. So you have to have broad schemes that cover and that have broad eligibility so people can access them and they're available. But at the same time, you have to have, you have to have something else, so that's why this is a complex problem, right? Then you have to have these specific targeting, but also access and conscious thinking about the groups that really need, that might fall between the cracks of these broad schemes. but it's not really. I don't like to frame this sort of the problem in terms of one of the other. Sorry if that's. I don't mean to critique you, but I think that's a sort of logic of scarcity, saying there's only so much we can give these people, and there's only so much we can give for energy efficiency. But in fact, we need a lot more, because these are giant problems, and we have to address them also, not just because of social considerations, but also because of the climate transformation.
Don't worry, but the question, the way I saw it, I don't know if it was initially asked by that by the participant, but was indeed the possible complementarities in the different role and how to make them complementary. That's probably also one challenge. And maybe Marta, you already mentioned that there were different programs, different schemes, either within larger program or maybe separate. And one question we got when we see that it's needed to have different programs, different schemes, etc., is that it can be complex for the households or the stakeholders to find their way in that. So do you have an experience in this, that having that is at the same time that's nice to have different schemes specific to each groups, but that at the opposite it may create like an overwhelming environment of branding schemes, names, routes, etc. to apply. So how do you see that?
As I see it, I mean, both are needed, as you all mentioned, and I like what Solenne says, no, that the larger scheme led or enable, in the case of France, to specify or to work more on the specific scheme. So I think that should be the way. And if both can help to make these measures more known in the vulnerable population, in this case, the better. I mean, the challenge here is the asymmetric information and the mess of all of the measures and all of the information that citizens receive. So, but this can be complemented by specific services of information, of digesting all of these measures. Shouldn't be a problem if it's well planned, but both schemes are equally important, I would say.
I'm checking the next. Thanks a lot, Marta. I think that's conclude very well the answers on this question. That there is another one that I like very much from Sourab. And I'm sorry if I pronounce badly the name Jogaleka. He asks you, what do you think about the concept of UBI, Universal Basic Income, that could be extended to energy, so some kind of universal basic energy? I don't know, Veronika, was it something that has been ever discussed at the Commission, for example?
I have to say I've been here for 3 years and I have not heard.
Okay,
such
so recently discussed.
No, not really. But obviously, I think in the social, in the charter, social charter, I think there is the right to energy is an established right. So it's one thing to have it as an established right, and then you need some supporting measures to go with that. So maybe there is some basis for that, but I haven't heard anything concrete that I could report from the Commission in this regard.
Anyone who want to say something about this, to comment this proposal? Do you have an opinion on that?
If I may, we tried to work on that in Ecoserveis many years, some years ago, and it seemed easy at the beginning. But for example, I will explain it with a simple example. For example, a fridge. If you have a fridge with a label of a D or a C, I mean the old ones, it may consume around 1,000 kilowatt-hour per year, while the most efficient one uses 350 kilowatt-hours, so 3 times less. But who can access and who can afford to buy this super efficient fridge? No, so here it was quite complex to determine a number or I mean, it's important to make the effort, and I like the wrap question and contribution, but I think, yeah, it's going to be complex.
I see, Stefan, you raise your hand on that.
Yeah, so we had lots of discussions about this within the Engager cost network as well. And there's been lots of academic discussions. There's a lot in the Global South around this. And people like, in the IASA in Vienna, people like Shanali Pachari and others have written lots of papers based on this idea of, so there's a few problems with it. So the first problem is the idea of basic. And the question is why, what is defined as basic, and why should poor people only have the basics, and others can have massive amounts of energy? So that's kind of comes a little bit to the energy sufficiency discourse. There's a second issue around the fact that and this goes back to a little bit to what Marta was saying. So this is not about the kilowatt hours that arrive into the home or the amount of whatever, it's not the electrons or the joules or whatever that go into the home. It's actually the energy service that is received. So it's about whether you have sufficient lighting or heating, which is like a more social phenomenon. It's a socio-technical phenomenon. So you have to define basic energy from the point of view of the final user, not of the energy consumed outside, which becomes more complicated as well. So like, it's an interesting principle to enshrine in policy when you say everyone needs to have, so that's why you have this idea of a decent home. Sometimes it's enshrined in policy. So you say everyone needs to have right to a decent home where, they have appropriate living conditions. So it goes back to capabilities. But when you start defining it quantitatively in terms of basicness and in terms of the way income is defined, then you get it right into all sorts of issues. And it could be even more dangerous in that regard, because then again, some others might be excluded. So I think, going back to Marta and what others were saying, I'm very much for this idea of the right to energy, and also Veronika said it, which is great. Also, like, it's enshrined, but how we operationalize it is a different thing. There needs to be more discussion across society about these things, so as not to end up in a trap of exclusion for some people.
Thanks, Stefan. We are getting close to the end, so I will try to catch a few questions and merge into one. Maybe before that, I try to answer very quickly to Dimitrios Karanis, who asked if we know about projects that would have dealt with informal settlements. So I remember one, I don't remember the name, but in ENSMOV Plus, together with the examples already mentioned by Solenne, we will also soon publish an overview of European projects that have dealt with energy poverty, and this project I'm thinking about is part of it. So let's say come back to the platform in 1 or 2 weeks, and you will find this overview and the name of this project. If someone in the audience knows it, please put it in the chat. We will also try to gather all the links, all the interesting things that have been shared in the Q&A panel and in the chat into a briefing. And maybe to end, there were one questions related to SDGs, one questions related to social policies. So maybe that comes back a bit to what Veronika, you mentioned at the very beginning, the difficulty to make a case for energy poverty compared to poverty in general. And so maybe the last question, and every of you could have a concluding remark on that maybe, is how do you see the policies to tackle energy poverty in the broader context of, let's say, tackling poverty or social policies? Veronika, if you want to start on that.
Well, I think they should go hand in hand, because often, those who are entitled to some social support are the ones that will need also some measures to help alleviate energy poverty. So I think that there should be cooperation, and it should not be that, you know, we are looking only at energy policy or we are looking only at social policy. And we've seen it in the discussions when we were negotiating the recast. There were clearly some member states arguing that there is no such thing as energy poverty and it should be dealt with within social policy. So I think, and I would hope that we can work together and not fight, that we can see energy poverty as a distinct form of poverty, but see it maybe as complementary between social, as a social issue and energy issue.
Thanks a lot, Veronika, Samuele, if you have.
Yeah, I subscribe with everything that Veronika said, like complementarity is key. And yeah, I mean, we are working on policies to help people, not to make policies more efficient, more efficient per se. And I think that that's the perspective that we should always have in mind. So yeah.
Thanks, Samuele. Solenne, do you any final word from your side? We don't hear you.
Can't you hear me?
Now, yes.
Oh, I was just saying that I also agree complementary is key and social is like the first. I would say that the social policy are the first step before the energy efficiency policy, if I had to choose.
Sure. And Stefan?
No, I agree. This is not just about one policy. You have to integrate different. Social housing policy is very important. Health policy, regional development policy as well. So it's all of these things need to work together to address what we don't call energy poverty. Maybe it's not the right word. Sometimes we call it household energy injustices or material deprivation. I think sometimes this word poverty creates a little bit of confusion because we're talking about something else more broadly. But maybe it's a discussion for another time. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We will not close the topic today. And Marta, to conclude before I hand it over to
Diedert.
I
mean, energy poverty is just distinct from general poverty, and it's true that maybe it's the word that we need to change or the language, but I mean, but cooperation policies are the key, and we cannot only work from one side, or housing or energy or social. I mean, it's like a combination and a cooperation between policies at all level, European, national, regional, and local, and of course at practitioner side.
Yeah, I think cooperation and complementarities, that's two keywords from this morning. Diedert, I don't know if you have some last announcement to do before we thank everyone.
Well, as an announcement, I can say that I'm very grateful for this excellent session. So my gratitude goes to all the speakers, Veronika, Marta, Solenne, Stefan, Samuele, thanks a lot for your contributions. Jean-Sébastien also, thanks. I was a bit more relaxed today than other sessions. So thanks for being a great moderator for today. Also, thank you to the audience. Yeah, we know that we haven't addressed all the questions in the Q&A. We will see how we can organize maybe to do some follow-up there. I would invite all of you to go to the website of the Energy Efficiency Academy, because there we will, as Jean-Sébastien already said, put a debrief on this session, including the links that have been shared in the chat, also the link to the recording and the presentations of today, so that you can refer to them afterwards. And there will be a follow-up session on energy poverty in this academy, and it is now foreseen for July the 10th. So keep an eye on your inbox, because an invitation will arrive soon. The date is maybe not 100% confirmed, but okay, just already pencil it in your agenda. So let's close this session, and thanks a lot to all, and we see each other in webinars.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.